I'm Ivan, I'm from Infinum, and today I'm going to talk about building API-based apps without an API. I know it seems strange or weird, but it's pretty simple. The idea is really simple. And before I start, I'd like to outline what I'm going to talk about. The first thing I'm going to talk about is the general problems with the APIs and the inconvenience they cause. After that, I'm going to talk about the architectures used to fix the problem, and finally the tweaks framework we used to fix it all up. So since I work in an agency, the clients usually come to us with an idea and we make the app for them. So the general project schedule looks like this. The wireframes are first drawn, and then after the client approves them, the designers make the actual screens, and shortly after, the API should start to develop, and then the iOS app. And it should all fit within the deadline. But since the clients are usually the ones that make the API because they already have some web services, the actual schedule ends up looking something like this. The wireframes and the design still stay the same, but the API development is kind of grainy, and it all extends the iOS app development, and then you go past the deadline. This is bad, not only because you passed the deadline, but because it's probably messed up your schedule. Because your schedule looks something like this. You have project after project after project, and then if you didn't finish the first one on time, you will be late with the second one, and so on. So to summarize, you and your app depend on the API. That's why we decided to remove that dependency and build the API-based apps without the API. So next I'm going to switch to architectures. So how many of you used or heard of MVVM or MVP or Viper or anything? Okay. So basically we use MVP pattern, which is also can be called VIP or lightweight Viper. It stands for Model View Presenter. That's why I don't like the name MVP, because it's actually VIP, which is View Presenter Interactor. It's a really good alternative for MVC in Cocoa, which in Cocoa it stands for Massive View Controller, because everything ends up in the view controller. So each of these components have their own responsibilities. The view is in charge of displaying the data and animating stuff, general UI stuff, and every user event that the view gets, it just forwards to the presenter, so it doesn't act on it. The interactor is in charge of getting the actual data. That means making API calls, making queries to the local database, and stuff like that. And the presenter just ties them up together, and it all works. In Cocoa, view is implemented with a UI view controller, while the presenter and the interactor are simple NS objects. The important thing to say is that the view and the interactor are actually protocols, so the presenter is not aware of their implementations, which helps the development. So basically, the general idea is that when a user taps a button, the view tells the presenter, hey, presenter, somebody tapped a button. The presenter says to the interactor, hey, get me that data. After the interactor gets the data, he said to the presenter, yo, I got you this data, and the presenter says to the view, show this data. It might sound a bit dull, but it helps a lot. So what we're interested in is the communication between the presenter and the interactor. Usually, the interactor is an object that fetches data from the API or from local storage. That means you'll probably get some JSON objects or some core data objects. And they go into the app and you do stuff with them. In most cases, you can assume what the data will be, and it will all work fine. Oops, sorry. Missed it. And it will all work fine. But there is only one catch, and that is that the assumption is the mother of all screw-ups. So if you assumed that the data is coming from the API, and suddenly you notice that everything is going slow, oh, we better cache this data in core data, then you need to change half of the app just to be able to use NS-managed object subclasses. So that's why we use this kind of stuff. It's defining a protocol between the presenter and the interactor. the interactor returns some data, but that data isn't defined as JSON data or core data. It's defined as a protocol. So in case of a person, it can have person ID, first name, last name. Generally, it will have all the data it needs for your app to be working properly. Okay, now that we know how to fix the initial problem, let's see how. Sorry, my bad. We use Tweaks, which is a framework by Facebook. This is their GitHub page. And to quote them, it's an easy way to fine-tune and adjust parameters for iOS apps in development. Its intended usage is to fine-tune animations, durations, and all kinds of UI parameters, as you can see in this GIF. It's really useful because you can make the app, give it to the designers, and then they just shake the phone and get the dashboard to change the parameters. When they close the dashboard, it all takes effect. So in Facebook, they generally use it for tweaking animation durations and or UI stuff. So, but how to use it is like this. The first three parameters in the macro are the identifiers of the parameter you want, and the fourth one is the default value. There are more of these macros, but you can see them on GitHub. And you need one more thing to make it work, and that's the switch your UI window with the FB tweak shake window. Come in, please. But that's not why we use it. We use it to implement our fake interactors. So basically, if we have a login call, which takes username and password and returns a block of data if it's successful, or a failure block if it fails, we define these parameters, which is, the first one is request successful, which means did the request even get to the server? So if it's false, it's like the API call return 500. Come in. And this way we can easily tweak every scenario. We can get every scenario very easily by just shaking the phone and changing some of these parameters. So yeah, we have this in action. Just a sec. Okay, so this is the basic login screen, and we can just shake the phone and set it to, let's say that the request got to the server and it failed to authenticate, blah blah, and it's working. And this way you can test all of the scenarios without actually having an API or having a mock API and then changing it manually, so you can test how it works. Yeah, cancel, brother. Let's say everything is fine, and then just log in, and then if it was implemented, it would go in the app, but it isn't. Next thing is the comparison with the rest of the alternatives. The first one is waiting for the actual API, which is not really a good option. The second one is creating fake responses in the code, basically creating your own implementation of the interactor, but changing the scenarios in the code. This is a good solution while you're developing, but it's not really good because you have to rebuild your whole project every time you want to change a parameter. And the third one are mock servers. Generally a great idea, but they tend to be very hard to use because you have to log in the mock server console, change the response manually, and then make the whole API call. But they are good. Generally, your clients wants to see the progress of the app, and the only way they can see it is through the UI. So we want to ship the app with the tweaks inside so they can test the scenarios. But by default, tweaks doesn't run in release builds because you don't want it to end up in the App Store. So that's why you have to add this post-install script in your pod file. You can find the script on this link. And that's about it. If you have any questions, I'm open to questions. Yeah. Questions?
So you mentioned another passion which you guys call Viper.
Viper, yeah.
So that's based on MVVM, right?
No, Viper is basically an implementation of what's called a clean architecture. It's a whole different pattern on itself, but it's more complex than this one I just mentioned. It's view, interactor, presenter, entity, and routing. Basically, it has another entity above the presenter, which is used to navigate through the app. It holds the navigation logic, and you have the entity, which stands for basically model. So it's
What would be one advantage of implementing this pattern compared to MVVM?
MVVM is good because you don't have to write a lot of code, but it's really not good for changing stuff. If you need to change something, you will have to change lots of code. Everything is tightly coupled. But in Viper, everything is a protocol. Every communication between two layers is a protocol. So you can just put anything you want. And if you want to, oh, now I have the API, and you don't want the API anymore, you just put in core data. But it's more code to write. So it's slower to write, but it's prone to changes. And that's why we don't use Viper, because it's really a lot of code. We use VIP, which is a lightweight version of Viper. We tried with MVVM, but we decided to use VIP.
Thanks.
Any more?
One more question. Could you use just shake gesture recognition? And I don't know, I never used it, but I guess it's something like detecting an action when the button was pressed, and you can put some code in it, and simulate all this changing parameters for successful input of username and password.
I'm not sure I get your question, but you can basically use the shake gesture for anything. You just did the Cocoa framework tells you that the phone was shaken and you can do anything you want. But the Tweaks framework by Facebook detects that gesture and shows you the dashboard to change the parameters. But if you want to do something else, you can just subscribe to the event of shaking the phone and do anything. Yep. Yep.
How do you define all those parameters that you want to change?
Okay, let me just go back to the slide. Yeah, this one. So it's basically, when you open the dashboard, I can show you actually. So you can do something like this. Hardware shake gesture. The first one is the list is basically to, I don't know, it's a category as you can see, and then inside that category there are groups such as here login. If I had more, they would be below, and then it's the parameter name. So category, group, name, and then the default value.
And this is per view tutor?
No, it's the whole app. Yeah. Anything else?
So how does this help you with APIs?
It doesn't help me with the API. It helps me to do stuff without the API. Basically, right now I have an app that has a bit complex onboarding process. We still don't have the API, but we have the whole API, the whole onboarding flow implemented. And then when we get the API, we just change the interactor objects from the tweakable ones to the real ones that connect to the API. Because everything in between the presenter and the interactor is a protocol. And protocols can be easily implemented with a category on the object you have. So if you have a JSON model object or NSManage object, you just define a category on it that implements the protocol. And you're done. Everything works as it did before.
But still, this is doing it without the data. You don't know how it will react when the data is on.
You just create fake data. You have a protocol, like if you have a list of people and you need some, I don't know, first name, last name ID, you just make fake dummy objects that have 3 properties, and in your builds, you just use that fake data. But this can, by tweaking the parameters, you can say, oh, the API call failed. And you can see how your app behaves when the API call fails. And that's the problem with mock servers, because they usually just throw you the response you defined. And you only have one scenario of the API call. This way, you can just tweak every possible scenario, test how your app behaves, and then without having the API, and then just plug it in. Yeah. That's it?
Questions? In that case, thank you again.
Thank you.